All right. So last week I was sharing with you all, I was able to have a series of meetings about the evaluation and just receive them. So the evaluation for both the general School of Public Health one that was given, and then the one that was just for our class, I got all that feedback last week. So I had a series of meetings about it and wanted to share back what some of the good, what some of the challenges, and then like what we're going to be looking forward to for the next few weeks. So the good news from you all, the top three, were that you saw the hard work that Janae and I are putting into the class with our passion and enthusiasm. So we appreciate that. We're going to continue working hard for you. You enjoyed the lectures and the guests. There was some feedback around how to improve both of those, but generally speaking, folks said that they enjoyed the lectures and the guests. And you also liked the variety of strategies that we were doing in class. So we appreciate that feedback. Some of the things that we can look forward to changing and some we've already done. So I just wanted to shout those out. With respect to structure, folks wanted a lot more transparent and open kind of ways of thinking about especially grading. So just to let you know, for the remaining assignments, I have created some really detailed rubrics that you can find on the syllabus, and we're going to be going over the op-ed one together on Wednesday, which is when we would traditionally go over the assignment 1 week before it's due. So we have a really detailed op-ed rubric and also ways to understand what the grading system is going to be for that and the final assignment as well. So feel free to look at the syllabus, and I've also tried to update the assignment component on Canvas as well. I'm looking at the time. It looks like you're about to get started, Janae. Go ahead. Oh, nope. Okay. I'll keep an eye out, but it looked like it was going to get to it. Okay. When things are due, so I already indicated that we're pushing some of those dates and times back. Again, some of that was arbitrary. And so I'm happy that you all kind of shared that what didn't work for you. And so they're changed, and it's that easy. With respect to the timing of class, what's happening even right now, trying to utilize this time for Kahoot for things that we could be doing and trying to make sure that we're having enough time for both the lecture and the activities. That's something that I'm working on to make sure that we have. Okay, asks from me. Please feel free to talk to me. So I know in office hours, some people have shared some things with me, and I'm sorry, keep looking at the time to make sure that you all aren't startled when it pops up on the screen. But some folks have shared things with me, and I'm happy to make changes. This is the second time I've taught this class, the first time in this format with the virtual online, and the first time utilizing a lot of these assignments. So I'm really happy to hear your feedback and to integrate that. I want this to be the best class for both of us. And now you're ready. Go. Oh, no, almost every time. So just talk to me. I know that you all have like group meetings. I know that you all have a lot of discussion, but I wanted to encourage you to talk to me and also to use things like office hours or our discussion board to make sure that you have enough freedom of voice. And if there are ever things that you don't want to talk to me directly about, I'm happy to create an anonymous way of reaching out to me as well. But generally speaking, it sounds like, you know, we're learning from each other quite a bit. I just want to emphasize that I am appreciative of all the feedback that you've given. And I just wanted to, again, let you know that I got it last week for the first time and had conversations about it. So I'm really excited to see how these last few weeks go with respect to how we can work together to improve on this class. So I'm excited. We're going to talk more about those rubrics and outlines for the remaining classes, but looking forward to seeing some mutual goodness in the next few days. So that's it for me. Janae, if you wanted to get the music cranking again so folks can get excited about this Kahoot, that would be fantastic.
Okay. One moment. It seems like the wrong Kahoot was clicked. That one just said 11-4. So, yikes.
Technology, it's a thing. You all can drop in the chat how you're feeling today. I know that some people were feeling a little heavy in the chest with respect to waiting on election results. So if you want, you can drop how you're feeling in the chat.
You guys don't mind joining, greatly appreciate it. So how do conceptual models for health education differ from others? They incorporate all factors with an endpoint of interest. They address a specific public health problem. They are multi-causal. They are only informed by one Conceptual models are allowed to include characteristics or process not grounded in theory. True or false? What should not be included in a conceptual model? Double-sided arrows, confounding variables, operational definitions, modifying variables. Right. So operational definitions are something that would be included in like maybe a paper that's describing the conceptual model, or possibly like the caption or something, but it wouldn't be included in the actual model. Conceptual models are useful for informing public health practitioners on how to intervene. True or false? Okay. So in order to determine sort of how to intervene, you might need to do more of a needs assessment. But a conceptual model might be like helpful in like determining parts of an intervention, but not necessarily how specifically to intervene. Which of the following is considered one of the 3 basic steps of developing conceptual models? Identifying resources for idea generation, explore risk and protective factors, consider the needs of the population, or A and B, both what's in the red and the blue boxes. Great, great job. So yeah, the idea is that you definitely want to include risk and protective factors. What is the purpose of conceptual models? To organize and synthesize causal factors, to explain alternative routes to an outcome, propose new research directives, and assist in developing interventions and policies, or all of the above. Okay, good job. Conceptual models are useful for which of the following? Summarizing and integrating the knowledge we have, defining concepts, generating hypotheses, all of the above. Okay, yes. A conceptual model must be applied to specific types of behavior in specific contexts. True or false? Right, so it's important to be as specific as possible with the conceptual model because you're including so many different factors and trying to determine really how different variables are related to each other and the directions and connections between those variables. What are the most appropriate descriptions of a conceptual model? Causal linkages among a set of concepts, a set of risk and protective factors, statistical associations that are implied by a hypothesis, A and B, which would be both the blue and the red. Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, BC Bond. I don't know everyone. I know that's Brandon, but I don't know everyone else on the platform, but great work today. Beautiful people. Alrighty, so toward the end of the class, I definitely want to see as many beautiful faces as possible. So I appreciate the cameras that are on already. And certainly by the end, if we can see some faces, because we're going to be working together today. So that would be great. Okay, so let's get into conceptual models. It looks, okay, we're still recording, great. Okay, so you now have gone through theories. We've gone through some frameworks. The question is, can you develop a model that addresses an outcome of interest to you? Can somebody come off mute and tell me like absolutely or no? Where are you at right now with thinking about if you can create a model?
I think it would take me a while, but I think I could do it.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Yasmina, did you come off too?
Yeah, I was just gonna say if I had something, a different framework or theory that I could see, I would definitely be able. Not definitely, I'm too confident. Right? I think I have confidence in myself that I'd be able to just by looking at something, but off the top of my head, probably not.
Okay, well, Yasmina, we're going to keep the energy where you said definitely. So that's the thing that we're going to roll with. So let's take a look at what some of the differences are between theories and conceptual models, and then we'll start to get into how to create that model for ourselves. So a theory is general or broad application. So this is where you, again, when we're talking about some of the theories that we've gone through before, you're thinking about it from a large application. But if you can recall that sometimes we get into the specific behaviors or outcomes that we're interested in when we show you papers, or we'll show you these are some of the behaviors or things like smoking, drinking, etc., that map on best to this theory. So the theory is a more general or broad application, whereas the conceptual model starts to drill into your specific outcome of interest. So a theory helps to guide what we are interested in and why we would, choose that theory for our specific outcome. A theory, both the theory and conceptual model should be testable. The difference is that for theories, you can measure constructs. So you would talk about it from a larger conceptual kind of framework, whereas the conceptual model, you're going to get into those variables. You're going to start to drill in, and we'll show you some examples of what that means just in a bit. For the theory, it's going to be abstract. And again, what Janae was indicating in the Kahoot, these are items that are going to be a little more vague, but when you get to the conceptual model, again, you can drill down to that outcome of interest. So it's going to be more detailed when you talk about the model itself. Both theory and conceptual model are replicable. And for the theory, the reason that it says may or may not be supported is because sometimes you can create a theory first and then get some empirical support down the line. So a theory as it's developed or as it's published may not be supported, but for a conceptual model, you're pulling from the literature that is supporting that theory to create why you think your conceptual model is going to impact that outcome of interest. So the conceptual model should be based on and supported by the literature and studies often that a theory starts. So a theoretical paper can start people saying, oh, I want to test that. So I'm going to create measures. I'm going to go into the community and get a sense of what that actually looks like in practice, which is going to refine my conceptual model more and more. And I'll show you for sure what that looks like for us. So a conceptual model, by definition, is a diagram of proposed causal linkages among a set of concepts believed to be related to a particular public health problem. That came up quite a bit in the Kahoot, but let's see what that actually, or in one more slide, we'll see what that actually means. The purpose, which again came up in the Kahoot and you all did really well on, is to summarize and integrate what we know. So again, if a theory is something that someone has already put out and someone's trying to test it empirically, someone else might be putting together, okay, well, this is what we know about this paper. And from this paper, this is what we know. So if we put all of this together, we're going to be able to see one conceptual model that brings together some of these constructs. It'll help us to define those concepts by having variables. So variables are the definitional or the more testable elements of a construct. It helps to provide the explanation for those causal linkages. So why is it that these two things are related? Why might something interfere with that relationship? It helps to explain that a bit. It helps to generate hypothesis. So that was one of the ones that it looked like a few people got wrong on that, but it does help us to generate hypotheses because you're making sense about X is related to Y. And you can say the direction of that relationship. You can say the strength of it. So there's a lot of things that the conceptual model can help us to estimate. And this is the one thing that Janae was indicating that it looked like we had a bit of a problem on. So identifying targets for intervention, and I'll show you from some of my work, how we are identifying certain targets for intervention. So if you see causal relationships, you can pinpoint this is a mechanism for change. This relationship right here between this variable and this variable, it's so strong, or it's so predictive that if we could do something about that, if we could bend it, right, then we're going to have the ability to, to change that outcome variable. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm going to try to keep my eye on the chat, but perhaps Janae can also keep an eye as well, because we have quite a few slides to get through today. Okay, so we had these slides at the very beginning of class, and I said I was going to come back to them, and I promised, and here we are. So we are coming back to them. So what are those things that we should know when we're reading about theory? There's a concept, which are the major ideas of a theory, the construct, the concepts developed for use in a particular theory, and variables are the operational form of constructs to be measured in a specific situation. What the flip are all those things, you might be asking? Great. I'm going to take you back to my research. This was the first week of class that we introduced this blurb, and this is what Janae was talking about, right? Where I'm talking more in depth about like the more descriptive elements that might be in a paper or in a statement up top. So I'm interested in fostering positive outcomes among urban Black youth in contextually relevant ways. I investigate how protective familial mechanisms such as parenting and racial socialization. So those are larger concepts, right? We can't quite measure familial mechanisms. It's a larger idea of what I'm talking about. But then we start to get a little more specific when I say parenting and racial socialization, which I'll show you as we get on the model itself. So I want to understand how those protective familial mechanisms operate in the face of risks linked to discrimination in a residential environment, particularly interested in how these factors predict familial functioning and subsequent child psychosocial and physiological health, especially relating to family-based interventions. So in that blurb, I'm giving you a lot of information on how I think some things are related, general concepts, but I'm not getting really specific yet until I take you down to the model on the bottom. So in this model, which again is the racial encounter, coping, appraisal, and socialization theory, which I'll show you again on the next slide as well, there are a number of elements that take from the concepts that I've already described to give you constructs. So these larger, you still can't quite measure these yet, but these constructs that are giving you more specific information about these larger concepts. So say, for example, I'm going to point to this one right here. So these aren't the only constructs, but it's the only arrows that I'm using. But here's an arrow as well. So racial socialization competency gets more specific than this idea of racial socialization up here. So we're getting more specific for this conceptual model. So not just racial socialization as this big literature that spans thousands of papers and several decades, but this really more specific idea of racial socialization competency. And then within competency, if I broke it down even more, there would be 3 variables that explain how we measure competency. So we measure competency with skills, confidence, and stress levels. In the same way over here, you might have the construct of intermediate outcomes, but we want to measure some of those intermediate psychological outcomes with something like depression or externalizing behavior. So we're able to actually hand someone a measure that talks about depression. That person is filling that out. That's going to vary between participants. So my response to that is going to be different from Janae. It's going to be different from everyone else in the class. It varies then between folks. But I can't just say, here's a measure on intermediate outcomes, because that doesn't get specific enough. That doesn't vary. I have to get more specific. So what we said at the beginning of the class to what we're saying now is the same, in that your overall thinking about these larger ideas are concepts. Then as you get more specific to what they can be in your model, it's a construct. And then the way that you measure that construct gets into the granular level at the variable. And that's what varies between participants in the study. So let me pause there. What questions can I clarify here that help with these ideas? Anything?
Dr. Anderson, I have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
for instance, let's say for instance, like for most conceptual models, would you say that all conceptual models demonstrate concepts, constructs, and variables and show that relationship between like someone moving from a broad idea to a more specific idea to the most specific idea of a variable? Or like, would you mind talking us through like your rationale for like maybe like your design choices? Feel free to ignore the question too.
No, that's a great one. So the blurb up here is not something that you'll see on top of most conceptual models, but to Janae's point, I've written a paper about it, right? So I've taken out some of those elements, or it's like my elevator speech of like, here are the things that I'm interested in. So most broadly speaking, you're gonna have thoughts around how things are framed. And even when you create models today, you're gonna think through just a series of thoughts or sentences that are gonna help you to put some ideas on wax. So the concepts are really just things that you're thinking through to start building these constructs. Now, every single model is going to have a construct, and it should get you down to a variable. So constructs are the most common ways of thinking about a model. It may not be until you're writing a grant and you're trying to tell the grants person, here are the ways that I'm going to assess this construct, or it may be so there's been a racial discrimination measure, for example, that just came out in this past year for kids. So maybe I knew that the folks were going to be working on that. So right now I keep it broad as a construct of racial discrimination. But as that measure is being published, maybe I change what the variable is. So variables can more often change than not, but constructs are going to be based on the concepts that these theories have dictated over time. So I hope that's helpful, Janae, but in concepts, this is the more conversational or thought-related process of why would I put these constructs on paper? Why would I create these relations between them? And then the variables get really tight-knit to this is the best way to measure that construct that I have on my paper. Maybe one other question if folks have it. Okay, we're going to get back to that Yasmina energy of absolutely being able to do this conceptual model by the end. So just hold on to that. No, but there'll be plenty of opportunities throughout. I have a lot of ways to assess throughout what it is that we know. So again, keep questions coming if you have them in the chat, but I'm going to keep rolling. All right, so this is the recast model once again, but what I wanted to show you that's a little different from the last model. Well, first and foremost, I have a few more long-term outcomes. So again, depending on what you're either applying for or what you're writing about, your variables might look different. So the larger construct is understanding that outcomes are impacted by stressors and racially specific stressors for youth. But again, sometimes I write for like an academic achievement journal. Sometimes I write for a public health audience. Sometimes I'm talking to psychologists. So that might differ, and how I measure that might differ for that long-term outcome. Here's the other thing that is unique about this particular slide, which is that I'm learning from other theories that are going to help me to understand why I put my theory together the way that I did. So what the transactional model of stress and coping model shows us from Lazarus and Folkman, which you all know very well, is that a stressor has a chain of events and how we cope with it, how we think about it, and what it does to our outcomes. So this is a really consistent transactional model of stress and coping framework here. I'm also thinking about self-determination theory that thinks about this idea of competency and how well I can do something in response to that. So I'm taking some of the elements from SDT and bringing it in. And then I'm looking at the health belief model. So what are the things that I can do? I'm efficacious in doing them. And then how will that predict what I do from it, right? So I believe that I can do it, and this is what it looks like, my belief in my ability to engage in these behaviors. So a conceptual, this is a theory, but when I, again, create a conceptual model based on what that specific outcome is, because that can change. The theory itself has those constructs that remain the same, but how they are measured, the variables, can depend on what audience I'm talking about. And so again, taking from those theories to create the conceptual model for that specific outcome is what I've done here. So you can always use theory to inform your conceptual model. You can use multiple theories, in fact, to do that as well. When we're talking about your final paper and your presentation, as an example, we're not requiring that you do a conceptual model in there. That seems to be really challenging for students last year. But my hope would be that you're thinking about it in this way. So you're putting together, like I've done the 3 theories here, you're thinking about what will my theories together do to help people change their behaviors? How can I let them speak to each other so that we're getting the outcomes that we're looking at? So this might be an example of how you're thinking about all of my variables, or excuse me, all of my constructs are coming together to predict the behaviors that I'm hoping to change in my population. So this is an example of what your final paper kind of mindset might be. So to restate, for constructs, those are the core components of a specific theory, the bolded text that I use in my models. And for variables, the operational form of construct, or how it's measured. So we've talked about that a number of times now, but just to reiterate, we included a number of models, so I'm not going to go over each one, but really what I wanted to show you before we start identifying elements of a model and before you create one yourself in this class, we wanted to show you how some of these factors come together in a larger model. So mine is a bit more specific, but this is Dr. Caldwell, the chair of our department, a mentor to both Janae and I. This is the intervention model that she has. And you see that there are things like background factors, various attitudes, parenting behaviors, and subjective norms. So some of that should sound familiar from some of the larger theories that we have already gone over. The intentions that they have. So again, that should sound quite familiar. And then outcomes as well. And then moderating factors, including some of the things that we've talked about in depth, like self-efficacy or cultural factors, some of the things that I just showed you for myself, and then some things that are really important to Dr. Caldwell, like social networks and social support, and the behavioral capacity of the folks in the program. So the purpose of this is to show you, again, how the theories come together to build this model for this intervention that Dr. Caldwell has created. But again, one of her arguments might be that some of these factors are predicting some of those factors, and what are the ways that we can intervene? So she's creating this intervention that's helping to address some of these relationships, some of those causal factors. She's hoping to intervene or change the mechanism between these predictor variables and these outcome variables. So that's an overall framework. And what I want to do is take apart some of the smaller elements of this framework and then build it back together again. So some of the variables you just saw in Dr. Caldwell's model are going to be explained over the next few slides. There are 6 types of variables that you're going to find in a conceptual model. Some of them you might use different language to understand. So independent or predictor variable, these are factors or the condition which influences or affects an outcome of interest. Or a dependent or an outcome variable is a factor or a condition which is the focus of the research or intervention. Explained very simply, and this is my absolute favorite mentoring point when I'm working with students, when I'm working with mentees, is to explain this as the X and the Y. So think about your why. What is it that you want to change in the world? So my why is the mental health outcomes of Black children. So the things that predict those outcomes, racial discrimination is what I talk about quite a bit. Residential factors, policy, it's that all of these things that can impact my why is how I think about the work. So my X might be something, again, like racial discrimination. My Y is mental health outcomes for Black youth. That's the most basic element of constructing any conceptual model, is what is this one thing that's going to predict this thing that I care a lot about. So if nothing else, this should be one of the elements that you're taking away about a conceptual model. What is the predictor and what does it predict? So the X to the Y. In some other examples, you might use, for example, physician advice predicting physical activity levels. So what is it that a physician is telling a patient, and does that patient heed it by increasing their activity level? That's an X to a Y as well. And you all will be thinking about your X's to your Y's today. Another type of variable is the antecedent variable. So that's a background factor or condition, oftentimes like a socio-demographic variable. So in the example that we just had, physician advice, predicting physical activity level, something that is an antecedent might be, well, in what way was that physician even trained? So in order to give the advice to tell a patient what their activity levels should be, what was the training around something like one's ability to give advice, if it's culturally relevant to do so, right? Is it more of a declarative statement, or do you work more collaboratively with your client? So that might be something that impacts the advice that physician gives their clients. For me, racial discrimination to Black mental health well-being, that racial discrimination might be impacted by the makeup of one's community, right? So you typically see in more mixed environments, you typically see more opportunity for discrimination to be at play. So that might be an antecedent to that predictor and the predictor to the outcome. So I'm going to keep rolling unless there are comments, and if you have them, feel free to chime in or to drop them in the chat. So again, here, looking at Dr. Caldwell's model, that's where the antecedent factors are, those background variables that are going to impact the ways in which those predictor variables are even situated to predict this outcome. Another antecedent example might be availability of cigarettes that predicts whether or not someone smokes cigarettes and perhaps has lung cancer as a result. So there are tons of studies that indicate not only the signage of cigarette smoke or smoking in communities, but if there are corner stores, the more frequent opportunities for folks to buy or to see cigarette smoking as normal, then that has a very strong association with smoking of cigarettes. And we know that it has a strong link to lung cancer. So that's just another example. Okay, the fourth type of variable is mediating. So that's a variable that explains the relationship between the predictor and the outcome variable. A mediating variable is caused by the predictor and at least partially explains how the predictor causes the outcome. So let's talk about what the heck that means. All right, we've got our X to our Y, our predictor and our outcome. More stress typically leads to more cases of, if this is the health term that we're going to use, obesity, that is what we'll use there. But what might explain that relationship a bit better than just stress is that stress often predicts dietary intake, an increase in dietary intake, and the increase in dietary intake is going to be more related to cases of obesity. So the mediator explains the relationship, and just take a look at these arrows. So this is a single-headed arrow from stress to dietary intake, and a single-headed arrow from dietary intake to obesity. And that's going to be important in just a moment. But stress is related to dietary intake. Oftentimes we know that some things that we eat can create some more stress, but the better relationship, the more understood relationship is that stress leads to greater intake of calories, as an example. And the more calories we tend to intake, the more cases of obesity we likely see. So here, the dietary intake variable is the mediator that explains the relationship between stress and obesity. Another variable is a moderator. So that's the relationship between the predictor and the outcome is influenced by different levels of another variable. So this is what that means. If you have a predictor and an outcome, or job to earning potential, there might be a moderator that helps to, and this is the way that I always talk about it, this is like a seesaw. So if job and outcome has a certain correlation, a moderator helps to seesaw that relationship. So what might a variable be? And you can come off mute or you can drop it in the chat. What might a variable be that causes a different type of relationship between job and earning potential? What are some of the things that might be helpful in understanding that? Education, Jadrian, great answer. Gender, great answer on that. Anything else? Those are some good ones. Age, that's a good one. Disability status, great one. So thinking about race, zip code, great answers, folks. So mentorship, training, availability of certain types of employment, right? So you can have essentially the same type of job, but if it's a tech, a starting position at the tech field versus at a local fast food restaurant, you might be seeing a different relationship between that earning potential. So those are all great. Those are all factors that are going to play a role. Now, what I'm seeing and what I want to address is that moderators can be some of the same variables as those antecedents, right? So what type of job someone is even able to apply to or get can be based on race or gender and things of that sort as well. So when you're creating your conceptual model, you may think about creating a host of variables that can influence this predictor variable. But if there are certain specific variables that you think are more closely related to this relationship here, would you be willing to, isolate those and really test those as specific variables that are going to influence that relationship? For racial socialization, for example, the way that racial socialization predicts outcomes is based, and the literature says, is based on gender, age, SES, and income. Those are like or SES and income can sometimes vary, but those are like really standard moderating variables. Even though those can be antecedents as well, there might be other antecedents that help to explain some of those earlier variables or the predictor variable better, but the relationship between my X and my Y is predicted by those 4 moderating variables frequently. So just being mindful of what are the things that the literature is telling you about those variables that's going to help to explain or help to modulate that relationship. All right, and our last puppy, confounding variable. It's a variable that's related to both the predictor and outcome variable that, when not accounted for, may result in a misleading association between a predictor and an outcome. So this is not something that you'll explicitly describe in an explanation of a conceptual model, but it's something you attend to as you're building it. So let me show you what that might look like. So we talked about the X and the Y, predictor, variable, and the outcome. Smoking and sex practices is a different type of example that we'll bring in here. Smoking is related to sex practices, but take a look at this double-headed arrow here. If alcohol consumption is placed in the model, alcohol consumption is not only predicted by smoking, but it also predicts smoking back. So it has a bidirectional relationship between smoking and alcohol consumption. And then alcohol consumption is often related to sex practices in this way. I'm sure we can probably argue that sex practices can also drive a bidirectional relationship with alcohol consumption. But the point is that a mediating variable would only have a unidirectional arrow here. So smoking would only predict alcohol consumption would only predict sex practices. But for a confounding variable, something that explains both the predictor and the variable, you just want to be mindful of would that be something that I need to attend to in the model? Is that something that I need to measure so that as I'm trying to explain my results to someone, I can say, maybe if we attend to this confounding variable, if we utilize a statistical technique that talks about its impact on the model, I can say over and above alcohol consumption, this relationship of smoking and sex practices still exists. So I'm looking at the chat. Carly says, can you define what is meant by sex practices here? So maybe the frequency with which you engage or the types of protection that one might use in your sexual practice. So yeah. Okay, so we're about to label these here puppies. So I want to make sure that we have just a bit of an opportunity to ask any questions about these, and let me go one step back so that you're not studying this model. So are there questions, comments, clarifying bits that I can give you before we look at your labeling of these boxes? What can I clarify?
Question.
Yeah.
So in confounding versus mediating variables, in mediating, I noticed that the arrow went from like the variable on top to closer to like the line between, like, I guess in this case it would be smoking practices.
Yeah.
Does that matter, or was that just kind of like a design thing?
Excel, yeah, that was just a design thing.
Okay.
Don't worry about that. Yeah, it goes to the box. So sorry about
Okay.
that, Kate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The only one that does matter in terms of where the arrow is moderating. So let me bring that back. The moderator is always going to act like a seesaw. And that's how I think about it. It's always going to be the seesaw, but other ones typically go to the box itself. Any more questions before you are the geniuses that you are and take over? Okay, get ready. So let us label the boxes. I'm going to bust out a poll for this puppy. So go ahead and tell me in which of the boxes are connected to the variable types. So for A, take a look at the list of mediator, outcome, predictor, moderator, and antecedent, and tell me what that one is based on the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and do the same for B, C, D, and E.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
I'm sorry. My Wi-Fi is bad and it cut out. Would you mind repeating that?
Sure. So on the screen right now, there is, I'm not sure if you got are folks getting the poll? Because I'm not seeing responses yet. Okay, so, oh, there we go. So folks have the poll, and what they're looking at are boxes A, B, C, D, and E on the screen. You're simply doing like a match. This is the best way to do a match the letter with the number that you see on the screen. Does that make sense, Taz?
Yeah, I forgot which box was for what. Like I forgot what like A was for what. Like if that makes sense.
Let's give it a go and we'll see what folks say. So we're about 20% through. So if folks want to keep giving it a stab, we're almost there, getting closer to the halfway point. So give it your best effort. Folks are doing a great job thus far making these connections. So you should feel confident in that. Good work. Okay, almost 75% there, so keep rolling. Almost there, just need a few more responses. Okay, we're going to start counting down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so great work on that. I'm going to advance to the next slide, but hopefully you can see the answers still when I have to share the results. 1 second. Okay, so we are looking at A, which is this variable that is the predictor. So that's something that's going to predict the outcome. So 3 to 2. Something that might inform the predictor is an antecedent. So 5 tells us something about what that predictor is. Remember that mediator is something that explains and has the unidirectional arrow. So from, let's see, that is 5. So you all, nope, sorry, wait, 1. So that was B, so great job on that. And then the seesaw, the thing that explains or that modulates relationships between a variable. And I know we didn't explicitly show you from a mediator to the outcome, but it looks like the vast majority of you understood that a moderator, that seesaw variable, can occur throughout that model. So great work, you all absolutely got these right. The vast majority of folks did, so great job on that. And hopefully you're understanding a bit more by looking at it and seeing the results, how those relationships work together. Okay, so this is going to be a split between Janae and I. So we're in developing a conceptual model. What we're trying to do when we think about interventions and behaviors of interest is to think about how any given behavior might have the following 4 things. Might have an action, a target, context, and a time period. So if any given behavior with respect to sex practices, like using a condom and having sex with one's regular partner, and doing that behavior always, so having a condom in that instance is something that someone wants to achieve, if this is an interventional behavioral goal, then that intervention should align with these specific behaviors. So if you know that these are the things that you're trying to achieve, then you're trying to think about, how do I go about doing that in my model? How do I go about doing that based on theory? So you look for things that help to address some of these behaviors for that specific outcome of interest. So if you're thinking again about what that thing is, that predictor that helps to explain that outcome, you've got your X and your Y. You think about, well, what is an outcome in the first place? It's the result from a behavior or action, the thing that predicts that, that behavior. There are a number of ways to think about outcomes. So proximal, if we were in that relationship here, the X to the Y, you may have, with respect to condom wearing, for example, if there are health statuses that are, and this is Janae's bread and butter, she can talk about it much more than I can, but if there is a health status that's impacted in the short term, but then what that short term health status might be related to long term, that's what we mean by proximal or distal. So sometimes you'll have just that one arrow, sometimes that outcome arrow might have a series of other long-term impacts, but this is the most basic X to Y here. Again, there can be a number of Ys that go from that one behavior. So when you're trying to think about a conceptual model that you would want to put together, the first thing that you want to do, and you will want to take notes on this, is to identify the outcome. So that's the very first thing that you're thinking about. Is it a short term, a long term? Like what is that outcome that I'm looking for? What is it that I'm really interested in affecting change for? And the second thing that goes along with that is identifying the factors that influence that outcome. Again, you're utilizing research, your personal knowledge and your experience, and theories, most importantly, to figure out what are the things related to that outcome. Then you want to think about the relationships among those factors. So again, when you're conceptualizing content, when you're just talking it out, you're throwing words and sentences and thoughts together to create some sort of thought about what's going on. That's helpful in identifying how these or like what variables you might be utilizing. But once you want to specify those relationships or draw those arrows, that's when you want to think about how do I pull from theory? How do I pull from what already exists so that I can create a model that is going to be effective, right? So this isn't just an exercise just to see, can I like draw arrows? It's like, this is really going to change someone's life if you're able to predict things well, right? So you want to specify the relationship based on what already exists, what papers there are, your personal knowledge, etc. The fourth step is reviewing the model and begin narrowing the focus. So the thing that I've talked about before in this class and that I'm constantly addressing is that you all have indicated that all of these theories and frameworks have relevant content, right? So why not make like a super model, right? Like why not have everything on the face of the planet in one model? The issue is multiplicative. There's so many reasons why we can't do that, but think about it in this way. I talk about it from a pie perspective all the time. If you have too many ingredients in a pie, it's saturated, it's not gonna rise, it's not even gonna taste like the thing that you want it to taste like. So that's the like way of thinking about it from a natural perspective, but statistically, it's going to be a saturated model. So it's going to be too many things going on at once. Participant burden is going to be challenging. So you're going to give folks this long survey that they're going to fill out and not be able to do anything with because it's going to be 3 hours long. So you really want to think about, how do I create a parsimonious or simple model that really gets at the constructs and the variables that have to be in there? What are the other things I can discard? And what are the things that are going to be really important to my model? So that's step 4. The biggest piece there is that model development is not easy. It involves several attempts before you arrive at your final model, and you'll get your hands on that today. Our model for recast was like just absolutely annihilated in the review process before we got it published. So it is very normal, underscore, circle, asterisk, incredibly normal to not end up with what you started with. And that's just how we are generally. We have to practice something to get really good at it. Again, there are going to be a number of theories that we're including here just so you can see how these relationships look in their final model, but knowing that it took an incredible amount of time to get there. But you can see how all of these things start with some, antecedent factors. They go into some of these predictors. They might have some mediators and moderators involved, and then they get to the outcomes of interest. So please feel free to peruse those at your leisure, and I can post those after class because I don't have anything going on for Wednesday. We have a guest lecture, so I'll post all these. So we started the class with a quick quiz on, do you think that you can create a model? Yasmina said, without a shadow of a doubt, 1000%, I could create it. Joe said, for sure, with some help, I could do it. So I want to see your chat fingers, since we don't have Twitter fingers on here. Show me with your chat fingers. 1, are you Mickey Ficky kidding me? This is bananas. There's still no way I could create this model. 3, well, with my team, it could be achievable. And 5, this is light work, not a problem at all, could do it in my sleep. Where are we at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, we're, I like the half. Okay, Kate, come on. Oh man, this is great. Okay, so the folks who are indicating right now are about in the middle. So with my team, it's gonna be achievable. We love to see it. So, oh man. So in terms of ordering the steps, before we get going, let's just make sure that we have our knowledge in the right place before Janae takes us on to glory. All right, so what is the order that of these steps? So take a look at all of the elements that are here, select potential correlates of the outcome, draw linkages among concepts, specify an outcome of interest, use an existing model as a starting point, and determine the initial relationships among selected concepts using theory, empirical evidence, and knowledge support. So we just talked about these steps a second ago. So if you want to come off mute, what's the first thing that we have to do in creating a model? The very first thing.
Specify an outcome of interest.
Awesome. And I didn't see who that was. Who was that?
It's Michaela. Hello.
Hi, Michaela. Thanks so much. Okay. So Michaela says specify an outcome of interest. I I'm going to look at folks on the screen. Give me thumbs up if you agree with Michaela, thumbs down if you disagree. I'm seeing thumbs up all around, 5 stars. Okay, I'm going to do this real quick. If it's all the answers, please don't hurt me. It is, wait, okay, whew. All right, so hopefully you didn't get all the look at that. So specifying outcome of interest is one. Who thinks that they know the second step after I just showed you on the screen for a half millisecond? Because you took copious notes. Aaron, yes, what is it?
It would be use an existing model as a starting point, like existing theories and research.
Okay, do folks agree with that? Thumbs up if you agree with that, thumbs down if you don't. Okay, I'm seeing some disagreement in the chat and on the screen. So Simone indicates that she thinks it's the last one, determine the initial relationships among selected concepts using theory, empirical evidence, and personal knowledge.
Yes, that fits what I said more, didn't it?
What'd you say?
That actually fits what I said more.
Okay,
When I
okay.
was explaining it, but never mind.
Okay, Jackson indicates it might be the first one. So we've got some disagreement generally. So this is what we're gonna do so that Janae has time for you all. We're gonna lay this out. And again, you should have this down in your notes just so you know what you're about to do with Janae. So we're gonna specify an outcome of interest first, use an existing model as a starting point, vindication, if you want that, Aaron. Then 3, select potential correlates of the outcome. Then determine the initial relationships among selected concepts using theory, empirical evidence, and personal knowledge, and then draw linkages among those concepts. So take a screenshot, do whatever you want to make sure that you've got that in your mind. And then Janae is going to take us on to how we actually do this with one another.
Okay, so we know that conceptual models are difficult to draft, and to make it as less anxiety inducing as possible, we're going to work together as a class to draft a conceptual model of concepts that you guys think are important or exciting to you, centering around this idea again of mass flaring. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, so first, we discussed that the first step was to determine what our ultimate outcome will be. And so I just said that I wanted us to situate everything around this idea of mass flaring. So mass flaring is our distal outcome. Can someone give me, let's see. I'm going to pull up my notes actually, and I'm going to remind myself of the different steps of a conceptual model. The idea too is for us to sort of like walk through this together so that you guys can sort of see like what the thought process looks like as one is drafting a conceptual model. And then I'm going to ask you guys to give me your feedback for what you think should be in the boxes, and then possibly to like share a rationale or to walk me through like your understanding for choosing certain variables. So we just identified the outcome. Next, we would identify the factors that influence the outcome. So I'll start with predictors. So what do you guys see as predictors or factors that you guys think would ultimately impact a person's mask wearing behaviors?
Their knowledge about mask wearing and COVID.
Mm-hmm. Right. Knowledge is definitely a big one. And that's definitely informed based off of theories that we've discussed this semester. Now, Emma, would you say that you think that knowledge would be more so a predictor or more so a mediator?
I think more so like a mediator.
Okay, cool. So I will add that here. Knowledge of the importance of wearing a mask. Okay, I'm gonna take that as knowledge of importance.
I don't know if she knows your time's her. She's thumbed up. Janae,
okay.
Just a quick note though, I think Alex brought up a really great point that I just want to emphasize. So would mask wearing be a proximal outcome and decreased transmission be a distal outcome?
Oh, it definitely could. It definitely could. In my rationale, Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to change it. In my rationale, I was thinking a proximal outcome could be actually obtaining a mask, and then the distal outcome would be mask wearing. But yes, repeat one more time what Alex
Yep.
said.
I was saying that mask wearing would be a
yep.
proximal outcome, and then decreasing transmission would be a distal outcome.
Yes.
Or
Wonderful.
rather, rates of transmission, right? So we never actually put the direction or the impact. So the arrow itself tells us the strength or the direction, but the decreasing or increasing is never part of the construct. So great work on that, Alex, and others who thought the same.
Yes, great job. Wonderful. And then again, with conceptual models, it's this idea that it's sort of whatever you can conceptualize and whatever relationships you see between variables, and sort of what you perceive to be a proximal outcome or distal outcome based on what you're interested in looking at. So all of these things are sort of like ever changing and a bit subjective based on your interests. Yes. Okay. Anyone else have a variable that they would want to add for predictors or for mediators?
I was wondering if maybe for predictors, it could be the belief in threat or the perceived threat of wearing a mask could be a predictor of whether someone would wear a mask.
Okay. I would say that perceived threat would be more of a mediator rather than a predictor. Dr. Anderson, would you agree?
So Lauren, can you say that one more time just to make sure I'm clear?
Well, I was thinking like a person's perceived threat of wearing a mask. Like if somebody isn't worried about wearing a mask, then they probably aren't going to wear a mask.
So
I was like thinking if you like took a group of people and just had them go around the room, yeah, I think right, or sorry, you're right. I am wording it weird. What I mean is perceived threat of the disease as a predictor for wearing a mask. So if I went around a room and asked people yes or no, do you think the disease is a threat? I'm saying that like as a predictor, if people said yes, they believe it's a threat, they're likely to wear a mask, and no, if it's not a threat, they're less likely to wear a mask.
So I think Janae's point is really important here, that depending on what you're basing your argument on, it could be either, right? So let's think about it from a mediator perspective, like Janae was indicating. Is there something that might inform that threat that's a bit better of a predictor than maybe that threat itself? So what helps to inform even that perceived threat, Lauren?
Maybe like the source of information.
Right. Yeah. So we've been talking about that a lot too. So Emma was hitting on it, and so are you, that knowledge or the threat or like what we believe about something can be informed by that larger idea of where we're even getting that information from. So that's a great point brought up by both of you. Great job, Janae.
Thanks.
Yes. And Lauren, that was a great point. Even when I was working through this last night, I was sort of trying to figure out, okay, well, where would these things go? And so thinking about like the source of information, I keep thinking about like the source of media and how media may inform one's perceived threat of contracting COVID, or perceived threat and inform someone's perception of the necessity of wearing a mask. And so I am going to move source of information and media down to moderator because based on like the news outlets that someone is watching, or based on the amount of social media that one is receiving, one's perception of their threat of COVID could increase or decrease, and the strength of and direction of that could change depending on types and amounts of media and that sort of thing. And then when thinking about predictors or like independent variables or inputs, I personally often go back to demographics. So things such as like age or race or even sex or gender. And so last night I kept thinking, I know someone for one of their assignments mentioned age as a predictor. of mask wearing. I forgot who it was, but someone mentioned a really interesting statistic. I think it was a couple of you all actually, sharing that young people often feel that they are sort of immune from catching COVID, or are super resilient. And so that may impact someone's willingness to wear a mask by means of their perceived threat or perceived severity off even of catching COVID. Can anyone think of maybe other demographic variables that could contribute to, that could fall underneath predictors?
Would geographic region be one? Because I know I've heard that like depending on like where people are within like either Michigan or the country, like they don't necessarily think it's as like big of a threat. So maybe like where they live, like the population density.
Right, exactly. That's a wonderful suggestion. I believe that was Brandon. I didn't see the picture pop up because of how my view is, but I think I know your voice. So thinking about geographic region, do you think that there may be, what moderators do you think may influence the impact that like geographic region has on someone's knowledge or perceived threat? I don't know if that makes sense, but it made sense in my head.
Can you repeat that, Janae?
Yes. The question is, are there moderators that anyone can think of that relates to geographic region that may impact like the effect that geographic region may have on mask wearing?
Political climate. Sorry, I can't talk. So.
Yes. Who was that? I can't see.
Oh, this is Yasmina. I was gonna say like Oakland County versus Wayne County or vice versa. I mean, a lot of places are flipping, but just depending on political climate, I would say.
Yes, no, that's wonderful. That's definitely something that I was thinking through that should be considered. Let's see.
And actually, Janae, real quick, as you're adding things on, what I want to underscore is that if we were actually making a conceptual model for the first time, Janae has clearly given thought to this, but if we were making this for the first time, you all are bringing in so many amazing factors. And again, it would be a conversation. So we would just be talking about what are all the things that might possibly go in here. Maybe we'll just have a list, right? A running list of things rather than trying to force things in boxes, because her boxes are going to run on to the second, page if she was listening to every single thing, right? So just being mindful that the first step is really just getting all the ideas out on wax and then starting to create the model. But because she's given it thought, that's why she's starting to put things in boxes.
Yes, and even before doing this too, it's also important to think about like just theories and personal knowledge. And so in listing like all of these different variables and all these different aspects that are important to consider with mask wearing, sort of my thought process was thinking about like the infographics that like we graded or the Twitter thread that you guys drafted. And I was thinking like, okay, what statistics and what variables have you all indicated that are important with mask wearing? And then trying to figure out, okay, well, what variables make sense where, and what is the interaction between those variables? And then also thinking about like specific theories that sort of like jump out in my head when I think about these different variables, and like when I think about the ultimate outcome of reducing rates of transmission. And then also like to just wrap up, so I don't want to take too much time. I believe we end at 2:20 and Dr. Anderson wants to do her usual wrap up activity. But also when you're creating a conceptual model, like we talked about the importance of like discussing and like bouncing ideas off one another, because like no one person is going to like, be able to conceptualize all these different like ideas and different key concepts and constructs. And so even last night when I was going through this, I sat for like probably about an hour trying to like sort through this in my head. And like, this is the first draft of what I came up with. And then I decided, well, Janae, this doesn't quite make sense. But then I was like, let me just ask my other friends that are in other like dot programs, like, does this make sense to them? And then one of them said no. So then I said, okay. So then I ended up with this. And then I was like, oh, this is still rough. It's a lot missing here. And then a friend was like, well, Janae, you're missing perceived severity. Like, why would you not put that? So then I added these two constructs here, or variables here. And then I was like, well, the point is for like us to walk through it together and to understand like the thought process and like the rationale that one goes through when drafting a conceptual model. So then I was like, okay, let's just delete everything and I'll make a note of all these different ideas that I had. Should like, like you guys not have a whole bunch of different like, ideas for what should go in the boxes. But yeah, so that's it. I hope that you guys learned a little something. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Anderson.
That was fantastic, Janae. And again, the point remains, regardless of, you all have some really important variables and constructs and concepts that could go in there. So the point is, it takes time. And even with our recast model, I don't know if I was telling Janae this, but we got to revise and resubmit on a paper that we're writing where the reviewer said, well, like the authors of the recast paper said X, Y, and Z. And we're like, we are the authors. Like, we know what we're talking about. And they said, well, they didn't call it a mediator. They called it this. And we had to explain. I literally went to the textbook that we're using. And I said, the purpose of theoretical refinement is, and I said, this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to refine, and it's okay that it doesn't fit the letter of the law. So we're all just trying to improve upon what it is that we know. So for all of those elements that you all said about where could COVID be, it really just depends on what it is that you're trying to argue. And Janae might say it one way, her friends might say it another way, I might say it another way, but as long as you have evidence to support the relationships and to support where it goes in the model, that's okay. So rather than resharing the screen, you already know what the exit ticket is all about. So step one, what did you learn today? What's one thing that you can share that is?
I have a question real
Yeah.
quick first, just to clarify. So with conceptual models, so you can have you could either create a conceptual model after maybe doing some kind of survey or some kind of experiment of some sort and then create a conceptual model. Or you could take models that already exist and look at literature that already exists and say, I think based on this stuff that this model might be true, and then run a survey that might help prove that.
Right. More often than not, what people do to create the literature is to have a theory. So they'll put a theory that does not have any empirical basis or has limited empirical basis and say, this is our theory. And then oftentimes what we can do is pull from that data that people are starting to use to either affirm or refine that theory and say, okay, well, conceptually, it looks like maybe we need to change it just a bit to address these factors or to address what's happening in the moment right now that look different from what would have happened a year ago, right? So the conceptual model absolutely can be based and should be based on empirical findings as long as it's relevant and as long as it makes sense. What's happening in the world right now might be incredibly different from what we've ever seen before. And so it may not have a model that predicts it as well as like what's happening in real time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So what did folks learn today? One thing. Steps in creating a conceptual model. Thanks. How to start one. Awesome. Antecedents. Difference between those tricky mediators and moderators. And that is something that's again going to forever be something that you'll have to battle with recast. We wanted racial socialization competency to be a mediator, and the reviewers would not let it publish like that. So you're going to be fighting for things that you think. We're just going to grab all of this data and just like drop it in front of the reviewers the next time. Like, we'll see what we really wanted to be is this, and now we have the data to support that. So as long as your rationale is accurate for that, you can continue to go between mediators and moderators. Okay, what is one way that you can apply all this to your life? Hopefully conceptual models pop up every day for you. Joseph, for the final project. That is absolutely one way that you can relate it to your actual life and future research. Awesome. Great. And then any other clarifying questions? So Lauren asked a great one. I know we're at 2:21, so if folks have to hop off, you're welcome to, but any other clarifying questions that would be helpful today? I'll stick on, but remember, you're welcome to use the discussion boards, office hours, and each other's group situations to get some questions answered. It's been a pleasure today. Remember that all of the rubrics have been updated on the syllabus, and have a great day. See you soon. Enjoy the day. It's beautiful. I see so many of you outdoors. Excellent. Mary, did you go for a walk or just sit outside?
Yep, just sitting outside at my dad's house, so getting some sun.
Very good. I'll join you in just a few minutes out there.
Yes. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Mary. Hi, Bailey and Caitlin. Did you need something? Or are they frozen? Bailey looks frozen. Or if it's a screensaver, it's a pretty darn good one, Bailey. You got us on that.